ברוכים הבאים לכולם מירושלים. The new episode of Israelities Podcast, live from Jerusalem.
Shalom lekulam from Jerusalem. Stefano here from our amazing studio here at King of Kings, Jerusalem, ready for a brand new episode. This is the last year episode. And today's topic, Pastor Chad, welcome.
Well, thank you. Glad to be back.
Today's topic is Chanukah.
Yes, big celebration.
Big celebration. What is Chanukah all about?
Wow.
Where does the origins of this feast, is it biblical? Is not biblical? Is commanded? Is not commanded? Over to you.
Yeah, well, look, we spent a lot of time together throughout this past year and all the episodes about the Feast of the Lord. There are the 7 commanded festivals. Then we add the Sabbath day on top of that. But then there are 2 other festivals that are very traditional in Judaism and Messianic Judaism, very big here in Israel. One of them is Purim, right, from the book of Esther, and we do that celebration. But the other one is Chanukah. Now, this word, the listeners are hearing us say the word with that heavy guttural sound of the chet, right? It's the Chanukah. And this comes from the dedication. It means to dedicate something or to inaugurate something. It can be the kind of the rebirth of something at the same time. And then if you look at the history of this, it's very interesting because when we come to the end of the Tanakh, the end of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, what we might call the Old Testament today, right? We have several hundred years, 300 plus years after the last prophetic book is written until we see the book of Matthew pick up with the birth of the Messiah. Now, in today's mainstream Bibles, not the chronological Bibles, but the mainstream Bibles, you have most of the Bibles will end with the book of Malachi. Why? Well, because when you get into Malachi and even Zechariah, those really later prophetic books, they're talking heavily about the return of the Lord, about the day of the Lord, the day of his reign. So they're kind of predicting that the Lord is coming, and then they wanted to fold that right into the birth of the Lord. So he is coming, he has come. This was kind of the idea, I think, in the topical portions of it. But when we talk about Chanukah, one of your questions was, do we find it in the Bible?
Yes.
Well, we don't find it in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, because it actually happened in the intertestamental period. It didn't happen in the Old Testament timeline. It happened between the times of the last writings of the prophets and Chronicles. We talk about the Chronicles, before the Gospels, the Bezalot, before the Gospels. So it happens in the intertestamental period. And during this period, you have a season where the Seleucids, right? The Syrian Greek Empire is expanding. They're trying to come and take over portions of Egypt.
So we don't have the Roman Empire yet.
Not yet.
This is everything before the Roman Empire.
We don't have the Roman Empire yet.
And the New Testament starts in the Roman Empire.
Correct. Yeah. So they're taking over parts of Egypt, and that happens around, Antiochus comes into power around 175 BC. Well, after imposing laws and the final straw of all this imposition was really to outlaw the practices of Judaism. No religion other than the Greek religion, whatever. So this happens around 168 BC. Now we're counting down to the birth of the Messiah. 168, and there's the outlawing of practicing of Judaism, but they've taken over all of Judah, and they've taken over Israel and the whole region. And this is where you see the story of Chanukah begin. Now, it's in its totality of its history and what it means and where it came from and all that. It's found in the book of the Maccabees. So just for our listeners, there are 4 intertestamental books called the books of the Maccabees, and there's 4 volumes of it, or 4, let's call it chapters of it. And the Chanukah is mentioned in 2 of those books. Okay?
It didn't make it into the canon, right?
It did not make it into the canon, but it's found in 2 of the books of the 4 of the books of the Maccabees. And in 168 BC, it looks like the family of Matthias starts to rebel. They take their own family, the 4 or 5 brothers, I should say, and they build this small rebellious army against the the Syrian Greeks who have outlawed Judaism, who have taken over Israel, and now they've started to desecrate the temple. And so much of the story then is anchored to this concept of Israel is being occupied again. We're trying to break out into freedom. There's an outlawing of Judaism, but it's really when they start to touch the temple and they want to paganize the temple, then the Jewish people can't stand quiet anymore. So that's the origin of Chanukah.
Is there the desecration of the temple with sacrificing pig to the temple?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different things that happened. You had forced eating of pork, where they were trying to force the Jews to eat it. You have the outlawing of Jewish practice in Judaism. You actually have the outlawing of the study of Torah. This is not even allowed to study the Torah. Forget worship services. You can't even study the Torah. They are sacrificing pigs. They're sprinkling pig blood everywhere. They're also desecrating the articles that are found in the temple, whether it be the menorah or the altar or the bronze basin, whatever, they sprinkle pig blood on this, and a whole lot of things on purpose, very much to disrupt the flow of worship and the study of the Torah. And when it goes back to the outlawing of the study of the Torah, this is where we get the practice of spinning the dreidel. You see, the history of the little top, the little spin dreidel top, it comes from, once the law had been given, that you couldn't study the scriptures, what the Jewish people would do was they would gather around tables, they would put some coins on the tables, they would spin the little top when they heard the army coming, when they heard the police coming. And when the police were not there, they would take out the scrolls, they would study the scrolls, but when they heard them coming, they would put the scrolls away quickly, take the tops out, spin the tops, and the Syrian Greeks kept thinking that they were gambling. So it's interesting that the practice or the fun tradition, the games of the dreidel actually come from the outlawing of the study of Torah.
Before moving into the historical part of the Feast of Chanukah, there is this prophecy in the book of Daniel about the desecration of the temple. Would you apply that prophecy in what happened in this period of time, or is some desecration that will happen in future time, like more eschatological point of view?
Oftentimes, we want to look at prophecies that have duality, right? They're going to have a dual representation. It's going to be a modern day or present day at the time of the speaker, and then a future fulfillment. We could look at that as symbolism, foreshadowing, whatever. So I would lean toward, we're really talking about the desecration. We're also talking about the abomination type of conversation, right? The abomination that causes desolation. From Daniel, and then shoot it forward into what we believe will probably be a third temple built here in Jerusalem.
Okay.
Yeah,
good. That's amazing. So what actually happened? So here in Jerusalem, Antiochus is doing what he's doing against the Jewish people, and you have this family, these brothers and sons, the Asmoneans, called also Maccabeans, which, if I'm not wrong, it means hammer, right?
Yeah. So the Maccabee, it means hammer, right?
It's more a nickname, like
it is. It's not a family name. I think historically people might maybe misunderstand. It wasn't their family name. It wasn't like, my name is Chad Holland. It's not Holland. It's not their last name. It became a nickname for how powerful they were. And when they hit the Seleucid Empire, it was a shock to the system that such a small Jewish army could take on what was really a regional army. And so they got that nickname, the Maccabees. It's always interesting also to point out little nuances of life in Israel, because we're talking about Israelities, right? What's a reality of living in Israel? Well, we use our names here in Israel, and a lot of our names come from words, just plain words. But in order to identify it as a name, you will take the same word and slightly change its pronunciation. So you will hear things like Maccabee is that's how one person's going to pronounce it, versus you might hear about our Israel Olympic Games, right? Or you might go to the medical facility and you go to Maccabi. So now you're hearing Maccabi or Maccabee, and someone might say, well, why is it pronounced two different ways? Well, we're separating the name usage from the original word. We do it with other names like Kelev is dog, but the name for the person is Kalev. So we slightly change it, or a sheked would be someone's name, but sheked would be more like an almond. So when we're dealing with Maccabee, it's a nickname, that we slightly changed the name for. But again, you're going back to the history of this family. Matthias, the father, can't take it any longer. He inspires the sons, and the son that rises up is Judah. Mm-hmm. So he becomes the most famous Maccabee warrior, Judah Maccabee. There's a whole history that ends up happening, but basically they form this small rebellious army. It surprises everybody that they can push the Syrian Greeks back. The goal is to first take back over the temple. That becomes the goal number one. Then once they are successful, in about 165, so the war starts in 168, it lasts until 165. A lot of people don't know that. They don't necessarily realize that in the history timeline, it takes almost 4 years. Wow. So this is not a short war. Israel's been in many wars, depending on where we are right now. We've been in recent wars as well. But this war lasted almost 4 years, and then they were able to take back over the temple. And it was once that temple had been reclaimed, then they were able to go in and see all of the desecration. And then this begins a whole nother process and chapter of the story.
And then there is the most famous miracle happening in that day or in that week, about the 9 days. Mm-hmm. There's not enough oil.
Right.
And then tell us more about that.
Well, they go into the temple now that they've been fighting for years, and they kind of free up the temple. It's back to the Jewish people. They're starting to inspect everything. And on the one hand, you can cleanse, you can wash, you can do it with water or oil or soap or whatever you're going to clean it with, and you can get the altar back to beautiful and everything. But you still have to light the Ner Tamid. You still have to light the eternal flame. Mm-hmm. And you can only do that as prescribed in the Torah, that it comes with a special prescription oil mixture. But the oil mixture, you can't make it overnight. It takes a while to make it. And when they go through the temple storehouses, they only find a tiny bit of oil that has not been touched with the desecration of the pig blood and everything else. So they, in faith, this is what's an amazing part of this miracle, is they walked in faith. They knew God would see their heart. And even if they thought, hey, we're going to go ahead and light the flame with the special oil that hasn't been touched, and we know it's not going to last long enough before the other oil batch can be made, in faith, they lit it. And that's where the miracle comes from. It should have been enough for 1 day. They went ahead and lit it in faith, and it lasted 8 days until the other batch could be finished and brought to the temple. And then they were able to light everything that needed to be lit, from the 7-branch menorah to the Ner Tamid to incense and everything else that had to be lit. But this is also why we have what we call on the Feast of Chanukah, the Chanukah. Mm-hmm. This is different than the menorah. The menorah was prescribed, commanded by God, to be a 7-branch candelabra in the temple. But the Chanukah, number one, it wasn't commanded. It is honoring the miracle, it's honoring God, it's honoring the day, it's honoring the rededication of the temple. But it's a 9-branch. So 8 days of oil, of the miracle of the oil. So that's where 8 of the branches come from. And then there's this very unusual 9th branch we call the shamash, right? It's the servant candle of the other candles, and it can represent the original oil that was lit, that lasted to light the other ones. And in a messianic setting, of course, we think of it like Yeshua, and we say Yeshua is the light of the world. He's the one that gives us light, so we use that 1/9 candle to light all the other ones. And so that's where you get this Chanukah from. And we just tell all of our members and our listeners, try to notice the difference this year during the holiday season. Notice the difference between the 9 branches for Chanukah and the 7 branches for the temple.
Would you just inform all of us what's the difference? What is the menorah in the temple representing, and why now we have the 9 branches? You already mentioned, but I would like to go to the original meaning of the menorah. Just take an opportunity of the feast to speak about that.
So you're talking about the key number here is 7, right? It's 7 branches. The Torah prescribes what kind of oil, when to light it, and what were the decorations on the original menorah. So it had to be crafted in a certain way. It has 7 branches because the number 7 is the number that God often uses as a pattern in the scriptures to denote or to define wholeness, completion, or fulfillment. And he did it in the 7 days of creation. He did it on the seventh day Sabbath. He did it with the 7 feasts of Israel, right? There's 7 of them. We end with Sukkot as far as the commanded ones. We have the 7 years until the Sabbath year. We have the 7-year cycles of 7 to get to the year of Jubilee. And so there's just this number 7 keeps popping up. And so when we're talking about the 7 branches of the menorah, we want to see it in the same light. God commanded that number 7 for a reason, to say, my presence is complete with you, or your life is complete when my presence is with you. Now come into my presence. The word menorah, we still use this word today, and it doesn't have to mean only the menorah. And so you might hear a slight difference when speaking to Israelis. Some of them will say menorah, meaning any candelabra, versus ha-menorah, the menorah. And when they say the menorah, they're talking about the one represented in the temple. You're going to hear variations of the difference from the original menorah to the Chanukah. You might hear something like the Chanukah menorah. They mean the 9 branches, different than the regular menorah. So again, you have a play on words. You have a difference of words and how it's used.
For me, it was interesting for our followers and viewers to mention that, because here in Jerusalem, we actually have the golden menorah that is ready for the third temple. So you can actually go, is according to what we read in Torah, the same dimensions, the same heights, the same weight, the same amount of gold. And it's really interesting. The way is built like that. The central is on the same piece of material, and then from the central there are 3 going on the left and 3 branches going on the right. Is there any meaning in that coming from the central one, like maybe God and 3 and 3, or
maybe the difference here is the designation of that 7th day Sabbath, where it was the 6 days of work, so those are the 3 and 3 going outward. But really the center of it is to find the rest, which is in the middle, and then the oil spreads out to all of them. The menorah that we have here in Israel that's been recrafted from the biblical measurements, if any of our viewers have not seen it, it's quite a bit larger than you think it might be. Most of the menorot, the menorahs you might have seen on tabletops or in windows or whatever, they're a couple of a foot high, 2 feet high, whatever. But the real one is quite massive. Yeah. It's much taller than a human, and when Yeshua, now just imagine that whole thing being that large, being lit, and being up on a hill. Remember, the temple's up on the hill. You go up to Zion, right? You go up to it, so it's on a hill. But it's so large that when it's lit to its fullness, you can actually see the menorah from outside the city. Which is why Yeshua said to his followers, I'm the light of the world. He was meaning 2 things. He was meaning, number 1, Genesis chapter 1. When God said, let there be light, and there was light, it was me. I was there. I came on the scene, even though the sun isn't created today, number 4. So I'm literally the light of the world. But he's also referring to himself in the temple related to the menorah, the completion, the fullness of it. And he's saying, just as you can see the light from the menorah from outside the city at night, so am I. You can see me. I'm the light of the world. I'm the one that lights your path. And then, of course, we go into the book of Revelation, new heaven, new earth, new Jerusalem. And again, what do we not have? We don't have a sun. We don't need a sun because we have Yeshua again. So 3 different times he makes reference to really being the light of the world.
And in the tabernacle and the temple, there's no electricity. There are no switches. You switch on the light. So the only light that you can have in the holy place is the menorah.
Yeah.
That's why you keep it always on so that you can see inside. The curtains are very thick.
Sure.
The light doesn't come in. So that is even more important to refer to you.
Well, here's a little detail that maybe our members would love to look up, and that is, notice what the material articles have to be made out of, right? It's your bronze, your gold, your silver, so it's all shiny, metallic metals. But also notice at sometimes it'll say hammered this, hammered bronze versus polished. And the reason that's always important is because when you polish the metal, it becomes a reflective material. And since the only light you have is the menorah, then it needs to reflect off the polished metal articles, giving a little bit more light to what was happening in the temple.
That's why Yeshua tells us as well that we are the light of the world.
We are the light of the world. We reflect his original light.
Exactly.
Yes.
That's really amazing. Speaking of Yeshua, do we have any reference? Of course, chronologically speaking, it's impossible to have a reference of Chanukah in the Old Testament. What about the New Testament? There is this reference in the Gospel of John chapter 10, I think it's verse 22, where it mentions the Feast of Dedication and intentionally says it was winter, like it is now.
Right. And it says it was winter and they were at the temple.
Yes.
So it puts us in Jerusalem, it puts us at the temple, it puts us in the winter, and using the Feast of Dedication, there is no other holiday in the commanded cycle where we would use this. We could go back to Pesach, Passover, so we know what that means, and Chag HaMatzah, unleavened bread. We could go to Yom HaBikurim, first fruits, Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, Yom Teruah, Feast of Trumpets, Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement,
There's
and
no winter
Sukkot.
yet.
And none of them are in winter, and none of them even remotely relate to dedicating anything.
It's true.
Right? It's forgiveness, it's atonement, it's deliverance, but it's not dedicating anything. So for us, when we read the dedication verse in John chapter 10 in a Hebrew reading, in a Jewish reading, there's no doubt. This is 100%. This is the Feast of Chanukah. It's using the word we use today for the word that we would use to dedicate or inaugurate something. So for us, very crystal clear, all the puzzle pieces fit. Yeshua is in Jerusalem celebrating this festival like the rest of Israel would have celebrated. So what does it do? It opens the door for us to understand more things. Yeshua embraced Judaism. Now, let me be clear.
No doubt on that.
No doubt on that. He embraced Judaism, but he fully embraced biblical Judaism, and he partially embraced rabbinic Pharisaical Judaism. No, those are two different things. I want our listeners to understand. The Pharisees continued to make up new rules. It's all written down several times in the New Testament. You obey the words of men more than the laws of God. You tie new laws and make the loads heavy on the people, and God did not inspire those. So we know that there's a biblical Judaism, which Yeshua kept 100%. Then there's a Pharisaical, rabbinic Judaism that they added to and they made up. Well, Yeshua uses some of that Pharisaical Judaism, or let's call it the traditional Judaism from the rabbis. He uses it all the time. In the Passover Seder, when he takes the cup, well, the cup is not part of the original Passover. It was part of the later tradition. He uses that for his own advantage, right? And I think the Feast of Dedication is something similar. He's going to use the festivities, the time around the temple to teach. He doesn't say, and by the way, this is a bad holiday, you should not be practicing. Yeshua has this great way of pulling the positive out of today's rabbinic Judaism, but also not being afraid to reject and criticize the parts that are inconsistent with biblical Judaism.
Can it be that the book of Maccabees, of the story of the Maccabees, was considered much more relevant at the time of the first century church than later on, when they decided the canon, and so we detached from the story of the Maccabees, whereas in the time of Yeshua, it was so fresh, so clear, so neat, and they were so grateful for what they have done, set the temple free, and Yeshua was more inclined. And I'm speaking a little bit of terms of replacement theology here. Is it possible that because of the canon, we detach from books like Maccabees or the Book of Enoch because of the decision that was made?
But it's also important to be, where are we on the timeline? So by the time you get to the canonization of the early Christian fathers and in the criteria that they are looking at, we're not doing that necessarily from Jerusalem. We're not doing it in the midst of Messianic Jewish headquarters. We're not even doing it in Israel. We're doing it in the diaspora. Secondly, on the timeline, we're not doing it while the temple still stands. We're doing it post, right? So you have this concept of the Judaism and Messianic Judaism of Yeshua's day has come fresh off of this history. They're still worshiping in the very temple that the story is about. But once that temple is destroyed by Rome, And the gospel starts to leave Israel, and you have later the apostles have all passed away, Yeshua's gone, and the early Christian fathers are now trying to canonize something. Certainly, they are losing the Jewish roots of faith by then. They've lost the centrality of Jerusalem and the apostle James being the head of the council, and they've lost the temple itself. By the time all this happens, I think you're seeing, unfortunately, a detachment from the importance of the story, and that probably played into a lot of why they chose what they chose.
Wow. How do we celebrate Chanukah today? We actually reabsorbed the Chanukah. I mean, it's such a fun festival, and most of the time it falls at my birthday, which is the 14th of December.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Thank you. But for some reason, this year is quite late. And interesting enough, the first day of Chanukah 2024 is on the 25th of December,
right?
Which is exactly the day of Christmas.
Right. Yeah.
Any thought on that?
The history is, it needs to be noted, the Jewish calendar does not operate on the sun.
Correct.
It operates on the moon, which is what God always told us to do, right? Evening and morning, the first day. Evening, morning, second day. So we still use that same pattern today. So when you're on a lunar calendar, it does not line up with the sun Gregorian calendar. But to a Jewish mind, Chanukah is on the same day every year. It doesn't move because we're looking at the 25th of Kislev, the month of Kislev. So it lands on the 25th of that month every year. It's just that the two calendars don't line up. So sometimes you're going to see it at as early as, and this has happened before, as early as the last week of November. That's happened before. And as late as this year. This is one of the latest years I've seen in a long time, which is it begins on the 25th of December, and now that makes it coincide with the celebration of Christmas. So if you do that same cycle over thousands of years, you start to realize that the two holidays overlap quite a bit, because one is 8 days long, one is 1 day, and so at most years they're going to overlap a little bit. They start to impact one another, the two holidays. So how do we practice here in Israel? Of course, we're going to light the Chanukah, one candle for night 1, 2 candles for night 2, and we're going to do that through all 8 days. We're going to use the shamash servant candle to light the other ones. There is the traditional sufgoniot that we eat, the donuts, the Israeli donuts that everybody makes, and we do them here at King of Kings as well. We're gonna play the dreidels. We're gonna spin the dreidels to remind us that we can freely study the Torah today, but our ancestors could not, and that's why we play the dreidel game. We give gelt out, the money, because we had to pretend we were gambling in the past. So we bring that tradition forward. We don't gamble, but we bring the tradition of the coins forward by giving the coins to the poor, or giving them to the children, or playing with chocolate coins. We call them gelt. We play with, when you're spinning the dreidel, you win chocolate instead of gambling real money, things like that. Some families give presents. Now, most Israelis, if I understand, they don't give presents because that's just not always been part of the Chanukah tradition. But around the world, the more that the Jewish community was interacting with Western Christian nations, where Christmas becomes a really big thing, right? Then the giving of presents of the Christmas sometimes overlaps with the celebration of Chanukah, and you get influenced and you say, that sounds fun, let's give presents. And so some families give presents. I know when we lived in America before we immigrated to Israel, giving presents was kind of a big deal of Chanukah. Coming to Israel, we still carry the practice forward. We still give presents on Chanukah, but we did notice that most Israeli families, or many Israeli families, don't do it necessarily for Chanukah. Another interesting note is on the dreidel itself, the top that you spin. It's a 4-sided dreidel. It has a Hebrew letter on each one of the sides. If you buy a dreidel outside of Israel, the letters and the acronym that it spells a miracle happened there, meaning over there in Israel, because you're outside of the land. But if you buy a dreidel in Israel, the letters change. It says a miracle happened here, because we're actually in the land. And so it's always fun when somebody gives a gift of a dreidel. You want to take an inspection and you want to find out, is this an international dreidel or is this an Israeli dreidel? Does it say miracle happened over there or does it say a miracle happened here? So just little fun facts about the holiday.
Speaking of Christmas, we already recorded an amazing episode about Sukkot and why we may lean on the fact that maybe Yeshua is born more on Sukkot.
Yeah, a lot of puzzle pieces fit. Yeah.
So go into our archives on Israelity Podcast and look at the Sukkot, where you will find a lot of material over there. But what about Christmas here in Israel, here in Jerusalem?
Well, we're in the middle of all the, so many holy sites, right? Now, Yeshua wasn't born here in Jerusalem. He's born in Bethlehem, in Bethlehem. Not to ruffle too many feathers, but even the Bethlehem of today is not the Bethlehem of the time of Yeshua's birth. We know that, and the people that live in Bethlehem know that because we know the shepherd's field and how the kings used those fields historically to raise cattle. So it makes a lot more sense back then. But even today, still there are some holy sites, and people want to connect Yeshua to the holiday. And but remember, we're in Jewish culture here. This is Israeli. There is a little bit of Christmas here, but it's coming from, it might come from Arab Orthodox Christians. It might come from Greek Orthodox Christians. It might come from the Catholic Church, other branches of religion like that. I have noticed over the years that some secular Jewish people, mixed marriages, they're bringing over some Christmas traditions, and it's more of, how would I describe it? It's more just neutral to them. It doesn't have a lot of religious meaning. It definitely doesn't mean Yeshua. It just means nothing. It's something the Westerners do. It seems fun. There's a lot of commercialization on it. So let's have fun and give gifts and celebrate the Christmas. The stories of Santa Claus and all that stuff. It's just so foreign to Israelis that it's really not even part of anything you're going to see around here. There might be some Christian organizations like the local YMCA, for instance, because they're a Christian origin organization. They'll do a Christmas tree. They'll do a special Christmas service, Christmas caroling, and things like that. And some of our congregations have found that during the Christmas season, because it's such a novelty, it's such a unique thing that Israelis don't really grow up with, that if you do a party, or you do a caroling, or you do a special event, a worship night, it's well attended because people don't know what it is. And they're like, listen, let's celebrate something, let's have fun. And so we found that at times, if used wisely, we're not leaning into the paganism, we're not leaning into that. But if you use it wisely, it can be a great time to share the gospel with someone.
That's amazing. Let's go back into Chanukah. What's the meaning for us today? The spiritual meaning of Chanukah for us today, and what is the prophetic inside of that?
Well, we want to continue to look at this word Chanukah itself. It's the dedication. We want to remember that this word wasn't invented when the Maccabees had their great victory. The word already existed in the Tanakh, right? So we're using it over and over. We're using it when we dedicate something. We dedicate a temple, we dedicate an article, we dedicate a child, we dedicate whatever it is, a marriage or whatever. So we want to be dedicated to the Lord. We want to be sanctified, set apart. You hear that word sanctify or l'hakdish in Hebrew. It comes from the word kadosh, which we're all familiar with. But we want to dedicate our lives, our homes. For instance, when you put the mezuzah on your door, what are you doing? Well, there's a prayer that you say for the likboa at the mezuzah. You're gonna affix the mezuzah to your door, but it's a prayer of dedication. I dedicate this home. I dedicate this relationship or this business. Even they dedicate the business. So using that word, I think we can apply it today and just say, listen, our life is supposed to be dedicated to the Lord. When you go through immersion in water, that is supposed to be somewhat of a Chanukah action where you're dedicating yourself to the Lord in your future. So when we light the Chanukiah, what's what we're saying? Let's dedicate our life to the Lord. Let's be a light to the world. Some of our messianic blessings take the traditional, rabbinic Jewish blessings and we tweak them a little bit. For instance, when we light the candles on the Shabbat or even on the holidays, instead of saying you commanded us to light it, Well, he didn't command us to light the Shabbat candles or the Chanukah. So you can't say commanded for that. So we change it. We say inspire, right? We inspire to do what? To be a light to the world. And so I think for us, these are two very easy, whether it's dedicate ourselves to the Lord, set ourselves apart, or whether it is to be a light to the world, very easy to connect these things to the festival of Chanukah for believers.
Yeah, and the prophetic meaning of Chanukah?
Well, I think for us, we're going to be looking forward to another temple, right? We see that there will be this third temple, that the Antichrist figure will rule from the temple temporarily. Yeshua will come back. We believe he'll take rule over that. But once Yeshua comes, if there's any interaction with the temple, that temple has now been desecrated by the Antichrist figure. I'm not going to try to predict what that is or who that is or how they desecrate it, but it appears that Yeshua is going to come back and there will be some kind of rededication process that will happen to the temple, to the city of Jerusalem, to the nation of Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So we can see a prophetic picture of this moving forward as well. And then if we jump into the book of Revelation, as I mentioned already, Yeshua says, I'm the light of the world. There is no sun. So again, Yeshua, and I'm talking in the future, not just of the millennial reign, but in the reign of the new heaven, new earth, Yeshua is there providing the light that we need in the world we now live in.
That's great. So as a conclusion, can we just wish to all our followers and viewers like happy Chanukah?
Yeah, you say Chanukah Sameach.
Yeah.
A happy Hanukkah. It's a very customary greeting. We say it through many of the holidays. If you can't remember Chanukah Sameach, you might just say Chag, Chag Sameach. You're saying happy holidays in general. It includes everything. But in this case, you can specify it with a Chanukah Sameach.
Can we say Merry Christmas too?
Yeah, if you want to say Merry Christmas, you welcome those that celebrate.
Yeah, exactly.
We wish you a great celebration, holiday with your family. Always, we try to inspire to remember Yeshua being the center of the holiday, and filter out the stuff that probably isn't worth our time. And again, if I go back to what we talked about, Yeshua had the ability to embrace positive parts of Pharisaical Judaism and to filter out the other parts. And I think we need to use this model even when we participate with something like a Christmas. We want to take the positive parts and we want to filter out those that we don't need to participate in.
Powerful, very important lesson. Listen, last comment. This is the last episode of 2024. It's been, if you believe or not, a full year of Israelities Podcast.
It was all tov.
Yeah. The next episode will be in 2025. Any comment on the podcast?
Well, it's going really well, and we want to alert everyone some of the growth that's happened with Israelities with your help, and please like it and subscribe and share it and put it on your apps and everything. But one of the ways we're going to be able to expand it is you can find Israelities not only on YouTube and the other platforms we talk about, but Spotify and Audible and things like that. It's now on the core. Mm-hmm. So any of our subscribers to the core, you can find all the podcasts, including Israelities, on the core. But we're going to be opening its own channel.
Yes.
So it's not going to be as hard to find under the King of Kings label through all the services and classes and worship music. Israelities has graduated. Yeah. It's become an adult of its own. With all of those platitudes need to go to you, Stefano, for doing a great job of producing it. But yeah, it's going to grow up. It's going to have its own channel here soon.
Thank you so much for the trust to run this project. It's been a great success. Thank to God. And thank also to all the people that are working and serving us, and our followers probably will never see them, right, which is Tyro, Dan, Veiko. They are helping with this project. So thank you to everybody. Well, as we say, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
And Shalom from Jerusalem.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Israelities Podcast. We'd love to hear your questions and comments at podcast@kkm.network. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Instagram. Shalom from Jerusalem.